Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 22. Mountainside Pass. I woke to the sounds of grumpy soldiers getting up from just outside the walls of our private caravan. Most of those early morning risers were miserably moving back and forth around their sandy tented campsites, while they woke themselves back up, sluggishly splashing their boots through slowly evaporating mud puddles while they prepared to begin traveling again. They bantered with each other as they moved around, talking about desertion, obviously too fatigued to care about what they said out loud, ready to simply leave and never come back, already despising the very hot sunrise they had prayed for all throughout those windy and relentless midnight storms. I got up feeling amazing, though, finding myself enclosed under the clean hanging sheets I and the others had initially used to separate our quarters. I was glad to get up and move out among those weary soldiers for some fresh air, even if most of the air smelled like drying cracked clay dirt and the stained campfire ash still fuming under tenting shades. I wandered across the flat, shallow white desert of our carnival-appearing military encampment, surprised to feel just how intense the strength of the sun was upon its rise, and just how quickly it removed the small puddled water seeping through its cracked, drought-stricken earth. Regardless of the general depressive vibe, however, I found a certain comfort in my early morning stretch and walk, catching up with the prince and the younger members of his former Beta regiment over by the closest neighboring supply caravan. "Morning," I called out, approaching him and his friends, who made room for me inside their highly selective chat circle. "Morning," the prince and his friends replied back. "Hey, Kaya. It might be a bit of an ask, but do you think you and Anera could scout for us today?" Arlo then said to me, his question quite formal and polite as he casually leaned back, with one foot pushing against that bunkered caravan, trying to appear as cool and chilled as possible in front of his friends. "A few fell sick from last night's storms, and they really could use some extra help now," he delegated. "Yeah, sounds good to me. I can go ask the princess if you like," I kindly responded, more than happy to oblige, figuring it would be a better way to enjoy the day rather than exploring nothing while we wasted away in the confines of the same boring caravan all over again. "Sweet," he added triumphantly, only to push himself off the caravan in order to stand up firm and straight, fairly content with how well he'd handled his first minor dilemma as one of the highest-ranking officers in his mother's army. "All right, well, let's all get moving then. Just one more long day in paradise, guys," he then sarcastically quipped to everyone in the circle, clapping his hands together in an attempt to confirm his orders with some need to make us all move into action. As with that being that, a rather bitter crowd all silently split off in varied directions. I headed back towards our own nearby caravan with the intention of waking Anera and Akoni up, surprised to see they were already out of the caravan. I was even more surprised to see the caravan was now home to a bunch of random grubby soldiers who were throwing off their dirty shoes and parking themselves under the thin blankets of our sectioned-off compartments in the caravan. "They need the break more than we do," said Anera, appearing abruptly beside me. "I hope you don't mind," she added, always seeking forgiveness over permission, but quite likely already clued in about the scouting plans I had come here to ask her about, seeing as she always had an ear in every room at any given time. "No, it's fine. I was going to ask if you would like to walk point with me today," I asked coyly, naturally assuming she was nosy enough to already know Arlo sent me to do so, and I wouldn't need to mention to her that it was under his command. "For you, of course," she replied, "but not because Arlo asked me to," she then added cheekily, not even willing to hide her stalking ways, but rather immaturely locking her elbow against mine and playfully skipping me forward towards the north end of our encampment. Well prepared, she unveiled a thin, lightweight sun umbrella from her other hand, opening it above our heads as we ostentatiously crossed the long, flat, sandy plains of densely populated campsite, and started moving towards the more isolated front edge of the convoy, where most of the soldiers were already unpegging the canvas walls of their carts and tents, just as keen to move on as soon as the orders were asked of them. By midday, Anera and I were far ahead of the moving convoy, always looking back and simply watching stubborn pride beginning to break the toughest of men and women, heat exhaustion and sleeplessness causing them to become irritable, teary, and even get violent with those nearest and dearest to them. We're being a few leagues ahead of everyone else, All Anera and I could do was watch and wait helplessly, witnessing members of the army break down and fight each other. Loyal spiders tackling and trying to eat soldiers at the request of their riders, only to be beaten down, restrained and arrested by the masses as our newfound patrol duties began to reveal just how grim our situation had actually become, and just how destroyed the army's morale had become, due to our long overstay in the dry and endless white desert. Anera and my biggest priorities were to look ahead and keep searching for the fastest path towards the Mountainside path, somewhere near the Red Canyon ridges far ahead. We carried the burden of being able to do nothing to help, other than stick to our duty, while Arlo tried to keep order of his most disgruntled soldier friends, who continued to push and fight over whatever food scraps others believed they were more entitled to. Hours had well and truly passed before we even caught a glimpse of what we were looking for, progress only seeming real once the white sands beneath our feet slowly thinned upon the gradual introduction of stray hollow pine tree spurts of shade, trees becoming more and more abundant as one bountiful precursor to the very beginning of a lush mountainside jungle pass that was gradually getting closer and closer into our view. Strangely so, even upon the sight of future forest and life, Milena was still yet to show her face or make a statement to her army. Instead, she always stayed at the back of the pack, keeping far away from any and all social interaction. I hadn't said a single word to her since our conversation back in her husband's study, where we'd plotted what to do about Midas and the crystal. She was being unusually distant with everyone, choosing to trot on top of a medium-sized battle spider as she silently and cautiously looked on from afar, never saying a word about any of the orders her son and his vanguard regiment were giving the rest of the convoy. Perhaps it was a test of leadership and character for him in her eyes. Or perhaps it was just her being cautious, choosing to stay somewhere where she could oversee everything from the greatest vantage point one could find. Regardless of her intentions, however, for the first time in history, our queen was out of her nest, far away from her dominion. She had left her husband, Delphi and Ebony, to run the city in her stead, as with such temporary separation of authority and control, it appeared that alienation was affecting her in a seemingly toxic kind of way. Reluctantly so, she had divided her army into two disproportionate halves when she had had to make the courageous decision to come to the caverns, deciding to leave all the slower, bulky soldiers behind to safeguard the capital, while she drafted the swiftest and most agile to come with her upon the dangerous dash to save her son and the huge diamond cortex crystal that was needed for the restoration of the collapsing sunspire. Every time I looked backwards, trying to spot her somewhere out in that distance, she was always somewhere on the edge of the sidelines, patrolling frantically about as if she was lost without the burden of government, dwelling in general isolation while the rest of us seemed to move on with or without her. As for Akoni's brave mother, Camilla was completely bedridden, traveling in the large, ostentatious medical carriage tugged by 4 spiders at the very front of the convoy. The queen had very few of her friends to accompany her, possibly afraid of a mutiny as a result and therefore choosing to keep to herself because of it, trusting only Sapphire to rally important information from the center convoy and back up towards her. One thing I did find quite profound about her, though, was that she kept a very close eye on the prisoner caravan in the dead middle of the convoy, not an ounce of leniency being extended to Midas or his most loyal associates, as they remained caged inside a thickly covered iron-framed transport caravan. The former king was completely oppressed from receiving any of the day's natural sunlight, perhaps just as afraid that if she was to give him the slightest opportunity to go outdoors, that he might be able to make another miraculous escape like he did back in Ambervale, not so many days ago. I had many questions I would have liked to ask her about the uptake on everything still unexplained, but those thoughts ended as soon as we traveled further into the woods, and I had to keep my wits about me to the rejuvenation of the upcoming forest and potential wildlife around me. Earth, water, and air were all intermingling before my eyes once again, as plant shrubbery revived in between 2 rich valleys that converged around us like a runway path leading into our forest borders. Sweet mountain dew moisture filled the air as a whole new diversity of cool and shady plant life inclined along with it, air constantly becoming thicker and denser as we plunged deeper and deeper into fresh-smelling clouds of mid-morning jungle mist, our breaths being shortened while our vision continuously clouded because of one all-consuming fog that rapidly increased and decreased, depending where exactly we were and how far away we stepped from the low-level descent of our one large mountain walkway path. It was only there and then that the soldiers behind us began to rejoice, humbled by the aerial sight of humongous hawking moths fluttering above us in the skies, serving as protective dragons that kept us safe from the more carnivorous flying gnats that were abundant across the lusher green land we had come back into. Our path safe so long as we followed these enormous winged creatures as they moved from the left mountain ridge to the right, scouting out possible sources of nectar to feed upon. Unlike most colossal-sized animals, we would generally tend to avoid at all costs. Sighting these moths was a sign of good fortune and hope, seeing as their presence often signified nearby water sources and swamp-based vegetables that had pretty much become a staple in modern-day nymph society. It would have been nice to explore the sidelines and find a food source to help revitalize the soldiers, but upon signaled orders from behind us, Anera and I had no choice but to ignore looking for any potential water holes, and instead allow nourishment to come from only the empty fumes of dew we inhaled while we pushed onwards, burdened to suppress our own rumbling stomachs in order to weave and work our way through overgrown ferns and bushes impeding our way. The two of us eventually, reconverging with the front line Beta soldiers, as together we all took axes and arduously begun cutting our way through those bushes, attempting to widen the overgrown track so that the wagons could be rolled through without incident. When the canopy was at its thickest, the darkness of combined mist and jungle shade was strong, and as a result, everyone was relying on Anera and her keen senses of sound to determine what was most straight and forward. The dense mist was revealing nothing to the rest of us, and yet more to her than unhindered sight would have done for her alone. It was almost as if she had two invisible moth antennas she grew in her travel time, as she and her sixth sense helped take us directly towards the long and brittle wooden rope bridge we had been hunting for since first entering the forest, under its two slowly converging canyon valley ridges. We waited a while to allow the others to all arrive at the cliff's magnificent drop-off point. Her and I were first to inspect the creaky old bridge before any of the others could come over and see it and frown. With much anxiety, Anera and I decided we would go first, hoping to test the flexing wood struts of the bridge's rotten roped-up plank panels before others got in our heads over how terrible of an idea it might be. So keeping our hands on the rope that acted as a handrail across the bridge, Anera and I carefully made our way across. We were at least halfway across the swaying platform before gaining enough confidence in its sturdiness to wave the rest of the convoy onto the bridge. We looked down in astonishment while we waited, having been too preoccupied by the danger of falling to even notice how amazing the view was of the low-rising forest gorge below us. Soldiers questioned the bridge's integrity before they and their ludicrous loads of treasure sleds decided to cross over it. Without having to be told, each spider waited patiently in line with its owner, only to cross a bridge one member at a time. Cleverly and instinctively, many of the spiders were silking the struts of the path back together as they went, trying to reinforce each plank to make the crossing safer for the next person to come across. Anera and I continued to stand halfway across the bridge, taking in the amazing views. It was crazy to see just how different things looked between the Badlands and the Borderlands. They appeared to be two completely different worlds when you looked back up and over, towards the large, arid, red-rich canyons of more ancient lands, only to turn forward and see life suddenly exploding with the envious green of forest gullies, followed by a beach and one long great plateau of grassy hillside towns like Treadfall, the place where Zephyr came from. I looked out towards the large uncultivated, windy hillside heath, where I believed Treadfall to be somewhere nearby. I wondered if it was a place Zephyr was hoping to see one more time before her passing. There was also the possibility that he would leave us to go home and stay with his brethren, now that the war and his conscription were over. In a way, we were all home again, re-entering into the furthest reaches of the Sunspire's dim light radius, back into a place well known for its variety of long-legged jumping critters. Locust swarms and hideous gnats of which Zephyr and his old archery tribe were fabled to tame and ride. As being up above most trees, I really did hope to see some of his old battalion mounting their field-hopping battle beetles as they swooped through the sky, patrolling our mountainside borders. Although when the first of the convoy got closer to the middle, I was also just as eager to abandon those thoughts and get off the bridge, looking forward to Camilla's first gateway stone, down on the beach ahead, which would transport us all back home. Taking it all in, we had finally made the dramatic transition back to life from death, as we left the fog and old wooden bridge behind and began traveling down the thin, rocky coastal mountain track towards the first enclosed beach and its ocean, walking under vines and branches of a suddenly tropical environment, Our senses were swamped by the lush green prickly beach shrubs we stepped over as we crossed onto the beach of washed-up seaweed, which was continuously deposited by the shoreline, dominated by tiny rapids, and many little inlet ravines further down. Nearer to the cliff's huge deposit of loose beach rock, we entered into the first cove of South Shore, a tranquil beach setting Anera and I sat down by, taking off our boots and planting our feet in the sand as we waited for the others to come down the long beach track. The two of us both silently taken aback by the quiet serenity of the ocean blue embankments and teal-colored rock pools by the cliff's rocky oceanside edges. The sea smell of Poland mixed with salt water and sand, refreshing to all who arrived after us. Upon entrance, no one seemed to care that the beach was a place of crime and treachery, renowned for its swindlers and smugglers, who notoriously used this land for transport of foreign cargo into and out of the borderlands. The desert had nearly defeated the soldiers, and all they cared about was the giant gateway stone stumped in the middle of the soft sandy beach, looking almost like an idol in need of their worship. It received exactly that once the soldiers took to the sweet surrender of the sands and dropped down before it, one young dirty grunt soldier even kissing the rough marble stone as he wrapped his arms around it.